Arrogant CEO said, "I don't shake hands with staff." Moments later, the black woman pulled $2 billion backing. It wasn't the first time Charles Blakely had refused a handshake, but this one would haunt him forever. The woman stood in front of him, hand extended politely, a composed expression on her face. She wasn't familiar, not part of his usual boardroom circle, not wearing a badge from the firm. Dark brown eyes, smooth voice, black blazer over a slate dress. She looked ordinary. At first, "No, thank you," Charles said flatly, not even glancing down at her hand. "I don't shake hands with staff." The room fell still. A few coughs were stifled. Several execs shifted uneasily, some blinking like they'd misheard. She didn't move, didn't flinch. Her hand hung suspended for a beat too long before she let it fall gently to her side. Charles turned his back to her. Then came the voice. "I'll need to pull our funding." He paused mid-step. The voice had been calm, precise, too calm, like someone flipping off a switch. Charles turned. "Excuse me." "I said we're pulling the funding," she repeated, meeting his eyes. "All of it." Now people were whispering. Phones were being subtly lifted. A few mouths hung open. Charles laughed, an awkward bark. "I don't think you understand who makes those decisions." "I do," she said. "I've already called the board. The $2.1 billion commitment is off the table. Effective immediately." Silence. Someone dropped a pen. "What the hell is this?" Charles demanded. "Who the hell are you?" She looked at him for a long, slow moment. "Ever heard of Morgan Drake?" He blinked. Everyone had heard of Morgan Drake, the mysterious venture partner from Silver Pine Capital, the reclusive billionaire whisperer who'd been behind 3 of the last 5 Fortune 100 unicorns, the one whose name never appeared on Forbes but who could make or break a company overnight. But Morgan Drake didn't exist. Not publicly, never on camera, never in rooms like this. The woman reached into her purse and pulled out a card. She placed it gently on the glass table. The letters were gold embossed. Morgan J. Drake, partner, Silver Pine Capital. Nobody moved. She turned back to Charles. "Next time, shake the damn hand." Then she walked out, heels tapping calmly across the marble floor. And for the first time in his career, Charles Blakely felt small. 3 months earlier, in a 1-bedroom apartment off Crenshaw, Morgan Drake was standing over her kitchen sink, crying so quietly even she didn't hear it. It wasn't grief. Not exactly. Not rage, either. It was a knot of things. It had started with her mother's voicemail that morning. "Baby, the nurse says she needs the rest of the deposit by next week or they'll move her to shared care again. I hate to ask, but..." Morgan had deleted it before it finished. Not because she didn't care. She cared so much it made her throat tighten. But there were some calls you couldn't answer until you had the right kind of power. She rinsed her mug, turned off the tap. The sun had already slipped behind the skyline. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. Another day gone. She still hadn't told anyone. Not her cousin Patrice, who thought Morgan worked in non-profit consulting. Not her friend Vanessa, who assumed capital management meant Morgan helped retirees pick mutual funds. And definitely not her mother, who had no idea her daughter now controlled one of the largest discretionary venture portfolios in North America. That was the deal. That was the condition. Silver Pine didn't do publicity. They backed disruptors, salvaged messes, spotted founders before anyone else did. And they never shared their cards. Not even with the companies they funded. Morgan hadn't planned to take the job. She'd been pulled in. 7 years ago, she'd been working at a low-profile family office, doing risk assessments for mid-tier startups, most of which were white-run and male-led. She'd buried herself in the data. Found the cracks no one else saw. Made calls no one else believed in. Calls that paid off. Then one day, a man in a gray hoodie showed up at her office without knocking. "I want you to work with me," he said. She'd thought he was a lost intern. But that man was Robert Tesla, Silver Pine's founder. The one who walked away from Wall Street in his prime and never explained why. "Why me?" she'd asked. He'd shrugged. "Because you see people. And you know when they are lying to themselves." Morgan never told anyone what happened after she said yes. But her name stopped showing up on LinkedIn. She left her apartment in Oakland and moved back to LA. She started traveling under aliases, using burner phones, slipping in and out of boardrooms where no one remembered her face, but everyone felt her influence. She liked it that way. Mostly. But lately, the weight of the secrecy, the double life, the guilt, it was starting to crack something open inside her. Her mother was getting sicker. Her brother was back in lockup. And the people she helped fund kept mistaking her for their assistant. Sometimes she wanted to blow it all up. Not out of revenge, but to see what would happen if the mask finally came off. She hadn't planned for Charles Blakely to be the one who tore it off. Not yet. That morning, she'd walked into Virex's glass tower without telling anyone who she was. She wasn't wearing a name tag. She didn't need to. This was a routine pre-funding site visit, at least on paper. A formality. Morgan knew the real reason. She'd been watching Charles. The man was slick, sure, tall, polished, Harvard-educated. But under it all, she saw the fishes. The subtle misogyny, the casual racism, the paper-thin ethics wrapped in buzzwords. Silver Pine had committed $2.1 billion in a funding round that would nearly double Virex's valuation. It was already making headlines. They hadn't signed yet. Morgan wanted to look him in the eye first. She wanted to see if her instincts were still right. So she walked in, took the elevator to the 27th floor, and stepped into the boardroom just as Charles was finishing his welcome speech to a group of senior managers. He saw her, offered a distracted nod, and turned back to the group. "Apologies," said his assistant quickly. "This is Morgan. She's, helping with diligence." Morgan smiled faintly. Charles looked at her, expression unreadable. Then he said it. "I don't shake hands with staff." And just like that, he failed the test. Only this time, the test had teeth. Morgan knew she wasn't supposed to blow the deal. Not without discussion. Not without consensus from the partners. But there was a clause in the charter, one they'd added at her insistence. A veto power, granted to the lead analyst when ethics were at stake. No one had ever used it. Until now. As she stepped out of the building, her heart was pounding, but her face stayed calm. She pulled out her phone and texted 3 words to the internal line. "I'm pulling us." 10 seconds later, her burner rang. It was Robert. "You sure?" he said. "Yes." He was quiet for a second. Then, "Okay." The line went dead, and Morgan finally exhaled. But she wasn't done. She had one more call to make. The next morning, her face would be on every finance blog in the country. Silver Pine would go public. The name Morgan Drake would finally mean something. And Charles Blakely would learn what it meant to underestimate a woman who never needed his handshake in the first place. But that was still to come. For now, Morgan stood under the early evening sky, phone still in her hand, city buzzing below her. And for the first time in months, she smiled. A real one. It wouldn't last long. But it was enough. The headlines hit like a meteor. Mystery power player behind Silver Pine revealed. Morgan J. Drake steps into the light. Virex implodes as $2.1 billion deal falls through following CEO's comment. She said nothing, then took everything. The woman who killed the deal. Charles Blakely didn't sleep that night. He tried. He even took 2 of the little white pills his doctor had prescribed after the IPO fiasco last year. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face again. Still. Calm. Cold. He should have known something was off. That she didn't flinch when he dismissed her. That she didn't stammer or offer an apology. She didn't carry herself like staff. But he hadn't looked. That was the truth. She hadn't mattered to him. And now his company was hemorrhaging credibility faster than he could contain. Charles wasn't the only one awake. In a quiet Airbnb high-rise in downtown LA, Morgan stared at her phone screen, thumb hovering over the send button. The text was for her mom. "You'll be able to stay at the private facility. I took care of it. Love you." She didn't send it. Not yet. This wasn't over. The press hadn't caught the whole story. Not yet. And she knew the vultures would circle fast. The company would spin. Charles would make calls. Someone would leak half-truths. And Morgan would go from shadow operator to headline fodder. She'd wanted to stay anonymous. That was the deal. That was the whole reason Silver Pine had built its power in the shadows. If your face wasn't on the magazine cover, it couldn't be burned in effigy. But Charles had crossed a line. Not just with her. With what he represented. What she remembered most wasn't his refusal to shake her hand. It was the way the room didn't react. Like it was normal. And maybe it was. That was the part that stayed with her. 10 years earlier, Morgan had been a night shift receptionist at a biotech lab in Long Beach, watching after aging research servers and making $14.25 an hour. She was 19. Her father had just died. Her brother had just been arrested. And her mother had slipped into a kind of silence that filled the house like fog. Morgan spent her nights at the front desk, reading investment white papers she found in abandoned binders. She didn't understand half the terms, so she started Googling them. Then printing things. Then asking questions. One night, an older janitor named Reggie had wandered past and seen her with a stack of reading. "You studying for the LSAT or something?" She'd laughed. "No, just curious." He'd looked at her a second longer than most people ever did. "Don't stop," he'd said, "even when they act like you're not supposed to know." She hadn't. By 21, she'd landed a part-time analyst gig at a local credit union. They gave her a cubicle with a dead monitor and called her kid. She tripled their small-cap return in 6 months. They didn't offer her full-time. Not until the white guy she trained left. That was how the game worked. And Morgan had learned to play it with her head down and her eyes wide open. But this new game, the one she'd stepped into with Silverpine, that had been different. At first, they let her listen. Then they let her pitch. Then they gave her one fund to manage. Just one. A test. She flipped it from $30 million to $190 million in under 18 months. The board still hesitated before giving her a title. "Optics," they said. "You understand." She'd said nothing. But inside, she'd promised herself something. She would never, ever need their permission again. That promise was still burning inside her when the first board member from Silverpine called the next morning. "Look," said Samuel Cho, a partner with a voice like soft gravel, "we're backing you. But you know this is going to be ugly." "I know. Virex is talking settlement. They'll claim you violated non-disclosure protocols by revealing identity during active funding. It's not airtight, but it's noise. You want us to send someone out there?" "No," Morgan said. "Let them talk." Another call came in. Then another. Investors, reporters, even someone from the White House press office. Apparently, Charles had friends in high places. That's when the real backlash started. Is this reverse discrimination in the boardroom? Anonymous power now demands accountability. Who watches the watchers? Charles Blakely, misunderstood genius or victim of woke capital. Morgan read every one. She didn't flinch. But it hurt. Not the headlines. Those were predictable. It was the silence from the people who knew better. The ones who'd smiled at her, taken her advice, asked her quietly for mentorship. Black women in finance. Young founders she'd backed. Colleagues who'd once told her she was an inspiration. Few of them said anything now. Fear was a funny thing. It didn't have to scream. It could whisper, too. Whisper that if you stood too close to the fire, you might get burned. Morgan understood. But she didn't forget. Charles, meanwhile, was running damage control. By the second day, his comms team had prepped a public apology. His lawyer had begged him to read it as is. He rewrote it. At the press conference, his voice shook only once. "I had no idea who she was," he said, reading carefully. "I mistook her for a junior staffer, and I responded, too casually. I deeply regret that mistake." He paused. "It was not personal. I believe in diversity. I believe in women in leadership. This was all a misunderstanding, an unfortunate one." Morgan watched the clip from her phone. "Unfortunate," she muttered. The apology made headlines, but not the kind he wanted. CEO claims it wasn't personal after losing $2 billion. Too late to shake hands now. And under it all, something was shifting. For the first time, people were asking out loud, who is Morgan Drake, really? Where did she come from? How did she get that kind of power? And why did she wait so long to use it? That night, Morgan finally sent a text to her mom. Her phone rang almost immediately. "Baby," her mother said. "What did you mean? You took care of it?" Morgan sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, feeling something knot in her throat. "I mean, you don't have to worry about the clinic anymore. You're staying. I covered the whole year. Maybe more." There was silence, then a quiet breath. "I didn't want you to carry this alone," her mother said. "I know." I'm proud of you. Morgan's chest ached. Thank you. They didn't say much else. They didn't have to. When the call ended, Morgan sat in the dark, phone on her lap, room still as a tomb. And then she cried. Not because she was afraid, but because something old had broken. Something she'd been holding together with silence for years. Now that it was cracked open, there was no putting it back. She'd been seen. And the whole world was watching. By Thursday, the knives were out. Not just for Morgan. For Silver Pine. For their secrecy. For the whole model of shadow capital they'd perfected over a decade. Who gave her the authority to kill a deal of that size? She was just an analyst, right? If one woman can nuke a billion-dollar partnership with a sentence, is this even a stable fund? Morgan sat in her third hotel room in 5 days, each quieter and more anonymous than the last, and scrolled through the articles with steady eyes. The smear campaign had begun exactly when she expected it to. The rhythm of power never changed. Expose someone who never asked to be seen, and they'll try to bury you under the spotlight. She didn't flinch at the words, but the photos got under her skin. They'd found an old image from a conference 5 years ago. She'd been off stage, blurred in the background, laughing at something no one remembered. Someone had zoomed, cropped, and filtered it. Tagline beneath it, "The woman who said no." Morgan shut her laptop. The room around her was silent, but she could feel the echo of her name bouncing through 1,000 rooms she wasn't in. She walked to the window. 18 floors up, the city looked small. Traffic like veins pulsing below. Somewhere down there, people were talking about her. But they didn't know her. Not really. Not what happened in that hallway in 2009. Not what she overheard at the summit in New York. Not what she'd seen Charles do to someone else long before he ever refused her handshake. That part hadn't come out yet. It would, when she was ready. But the truth was uglier than anyone expected. And if she was going to speak it, she needed to be ready to burn everything that came with it. That same day, in a much colder boardroom on the East Coast, Silver Pine's partners gathered in person for the first time in a year. They weren't angry, but they were scared. She had the right to pull the deal, Samuel Cho said, leaning forward, fingers steepled. It was in the clause. Yes, said Elena Montrose, older and sharper than most in the room. But the clause was never meant for public execution. She didn't go public, Robert Tesla said quietly. Everyone turned. Robert rarely spoke. The man had built the entire firm on the belief that power didn't need volume, it needed precision. When he said something, people stopped breathing to hear it. She revealed herself in a moment. Robert continued. Not for attention. For a line. Still, said another partner, a man from Zurich whose name Morgan never used out loud. We're bleeding media goodwill. We need a narrative. Robert nodded slowly. Then let's give them one. Meanwhile, Charles was melting down behind the scenes. He hadn't spoken to legal since the second statement. His PR team had stopped returning texts. Investors were skittish. His staff was whispering behind closed doors. But none of that bothered him as much as the new rumor. He heard it from a junior engineer who swore she overheard something on the 33rd floor. Morgan's not done. The words stuck to him like oil. What did that mean? What else could she possibly have? He started calling mutual contacts, asking for her background, her resume, anything. But nothing added up. No LinkedIn, no published deals, no public speaking events, no press clippings, no breadcrumbs. Just ghost trails and old aliases. He dug deeper, found a name she used years ago. MJ Drake. Tracked it to a consulting firm in Oakland, now shuttered. No digital records. Then he found the reference. A sealed report from 2017. Confidential. Silver Pine internal memo. He used a favor. Got a peek. And froze. Assessment. Subject has exceptional risk evaluation instincts, emotionally predictive reasoning, and deep-field contextual intelligence. Unique asset. Recommendation. Restricted identity access. Immediate onboarding to inner circle clearance. The note was signed by Robert Tesla. But it was the last line that haunted Charles. Keep her face off the boardroom floor until she chooses otherwise. He put the file down and stared out his window for a long time. Morgan hadn't just been allowed into the room. She was the room. And he hadn't even seen her coming. Friday afternoon, Morgan walked into the Echo building in downtown LA, one of Silver Pine's off-books hubs. No signage, just clean lines and quiet glass. She was greeted by a woman she'd trained 2 years earlier. "Welcome back," the woman said with a small smile. Morgan nodded. Upstairs, the partners were waiting. Robert sat at the head of the table. There was no agenda, no slides, just silence and Morgan's face. Robert leaned forward. "What's your move?" Morgan looked around the room. "I want to speak." "Publicly?" Samuel asked, brows raised. "No," she said. "On my terms. With my words. Not a press release. Not a headline. A story. The whole thing." "Why?" "Because people need to understand the cost of being unseen for too long." No one said anything for a moment. Then Elena nodded. "You'll have to give them more than the handshake story." "I know." Robert studied her. "And if the next name is bigger than Blakely?" Morgan looked him straight in the eye. "Then it's bigger." He nodded once. That was all the approval she needed. They ended the meeting in silence. Outside, Morgan pulled a phone from her coat and dialed a number she hadn't used in 7 years. The voice on the other end cracked with age. "Hello." "It's me," she said. "Morgan." A pause. "Didn't think you'd ever call again." "Something's coming," she said softly. "And I need you to remember what happened at Centris Capital. The night you saw the file. The one with Blakely's signature on it." Another long pause. "I remember," the voice said. Morgan exhaled. "Good. Because the world's about to." The old man's voice hadn't changed. Gravel and wind. Like a porch step in winter. Morgan hadn't heard it since she was 23. That night, 7 years ago, he'd come to her with shaking hands and a sealed envelope. "I shouldn't be showing you this," he'd said. "But if I die and no one knows, it'll be like it never happened." She'd taken the file, read every word, and buried it. Buried it so deep, she thought maybe she could live without ever digging it up again. But the moment Charles Blakely turned his back on her, it had started clawing its way back to the surface. She couldn't ignore it now. Not when the world was watching. Not when his empire was wobbling. If she was going to finish this, she had to go all the way back to where it started. To Centris. Back then, Centris Capital had been the shiny thing. A venture firm so aggressively elite it made everyone else feel small just walking past their office tower. Morgan had worked there briefly. Internship. Spring term. Fresh out of Berkeley, barely 22, hungry as hell. They'd let her in because someone else dropped out last minute. She wasn't the type they normally picked. She was smarter, hungrier, more dangerous. They just didn't see it yet. They stuck her in a sub-basement with a broken monitor and told her to shadow ops. She didn't even get a badge at first. She spent her days reading buried reports, leftover analysis, cleaning data no one cared about. She didn't complain. She studied and listened, especially to the late-night meetings on the top floor when the board thought no one else was there. She remembered one in particular. 4 men, 1 woman, heated voices. "It's unethical. It's not illegal. That's not the same thing." And then a voice, sharp, male, too calm. "If we don't bury it, we lose the entire deal. We lose Virex." That name. She hadn't known what Virex was then, but she remembered the sound of it in the dark. She remembered the silence that followed. And later, when she asked the janitor, Clarence, what the deal was about, he didn't answer at first. Just looked at her a long time and said, "Some things don't get fixed. They get paid to go away." That night, he gave her the envelope. Inside, memos, emails, a spreadsheet. A silent story. Data falsification. Rushed clinical trials. Payments to hush one of the researchers, Aisha Grant, a black microbiologist who'd filed internal complaints that mysteriously vanished from the system. Morgan read it all. Every line. And at the top of the chain, signing off, Charles A. Blakely. Virex hadn't even been a real company then. Just a shell with a promise. But they'd needed the backing of Centris to launch. And Centris needed Blakely to play by their rules. So they cleaned it, covered it, and made him a star. Morgan didn't know what to do with what she'd found. She was 22. She printed a copy and gave it back to Clarence, burned the rest, and walked away from Centris without a single contact to show for it. Until now. Now, Clarence was dying. Liver failure. He didn't say it outright, but Morgan could hear it in his breath. "I got a box in my storage unit," he said over the phone. "Unit 14B. Red Hook Lock. You remember the street?" "I do. I kept a copy," he said, voice thinner now. "I didn't trust the air in that building. Felt like truth rotted there." Morgan smiled faintly. "You were right. You sure you want to do this, baby girl?" "I'm past want," she said. "This is need." She booked a red-eye to Oakland and slept the whole way with her coat bunched under her head and a scarf pulled low over her face. The storage unit smelled like dust and old rubber. The air was cold, metallic. She found the box exactly where he said. Plastic, taped at the edges. Inside, the file. Still sealed. And a note on top. "Don't let them rewrite it." She stood in the cold, holding the box to her chest, feeling like she was 22 again and on fire. This time, she wouldn't burn quietly. Back in LA, Morgan reached out to a name she hadn't used since she left that world behind. Zara King, journalist, former finance editor at The Verge, now freelance. Hard to reach, even harder to buy. Zara had once called Morgan the most terrifying mind on the West Coast after she watched her dismantle a startup pitch with 6 questions in under 5 minutes. Morgan had laughed it off then, but she remembered. She sent one text. "I have a story. It goes beyond Virex. Meet." The reply came in under 3 minutes. "Time. Place. I'll be there." They met at a park bench in the Arts District just after dusk. The air smelled like food trucks and faint weed smoke. Zara wore a leather jacket and an expression like she already knew this would be big. Morgan handed her the file. Zara didn't ask questions right away. She just flipped through, eyes scanning fast. 10 pages in, she looked up. "Holy shit." Morgan nodded. "This is the original fraud. Blakely was dirty before Virex even had name. And Centris buried it. You have proof of that." Morgan pulled out the signed memo. Charles S. initials, date stamped. Underlined. Zara stared at it for a long moment. "This goes beyond business," she said quietly. "This could bring down Centris. Possibly more." Morgan's voice was soft. "I'm counting on it." Zara closed the file. "I'll need verification. Interviews. Records. We publish this wrong and they'll bury me." "You won't," Morgan said. "I'll give you everything you need. You run it. And I'll speak. On the record." Zara hesitated. "You're ready to go public now." Morgan looked her straight in the eye. "I've been hiding for a long time. But the truth deserves a face." Zara nodded slowly. Then her eyes sharpened. "What about the researcher? Aisha Grant. Do we know where she is?" Morgan blinked. "I've tried. She vanished years ago." Zara stood. "I'll find her. If she's alive, I'll get her voice." Morgan's breath caught. For a second, she saw Aisha. Young, brilliant, locked in a lab, begging the system to listen. Maybe she'd never stopped screaming. Maybe Morgan could help the world finally hear her. As Zara walked away, file tucked under her arm like a torch, Morgan sat back and looked up at the sky. It was dark, but stars were breaking through. The reckoning was coming. Not with fury, not with fire, but with truth. And when it landed, it wouldn't just shake Charles Blakely. It would rewrite the story of who gets to build, who gets to break, and who never gets asked to shake hands at all. The message landed at 3:17 a.m. Zara. Found her. Morgan sat up in bed so fast her blanket slid to the floor. She stared at the screen. Heart pounding. Then another text came through. Aisha Grant. Living under her mother's name. Changed it after settlement. She's in Atlanta. I called the number. She answered. Said she's willing to talk. To you. Morgan didn't respond at first. She closed her eyes and breathed. Deep and slow. That name, Aisha Grant, had lived in a shadowed corner of her mind for a decade. Not just because of what had been done to her, but because of how easily she'd disappeared. How even Morgan, with all her reach, hadn't been able to find her. Until now. She opened her eyes. Picked up the phone. Typed 2 words. "I'm coming." She flew to Atlanta the next evening, avoiding airports where she might be recognized. No public car service. No press. The driver who picked her up was an old college friend, now working nights as a Lyft contractor. She didn't explain anything, just handed him an address scribbled on the back of a napkin. "You good?" he asked quietly as they pulled onto the highway. Morgan hesitated. Not yet, she said, but I'm close. Aisha lived on the east side, near Edgewood. A modest house with overgrown azaleas along the porch and a rusted mailbox that leaned slightly to the right. Morgan stood at the gate for a moment before ringing the bell. The door opened slowly, and there she was. Older, different, but unmistakably the same. Aisha Grant had a face you didn't forget, deep brown skin, high cheekbones, and eyes that held the weight of rooms she was never meant to be in. She wore a hoodie and jeans, hair pulled back, no makeup. She didn't speak. Neither did Morgan. Not right away. Then, after a long pause, Aisha said, I heard what you did to him. Morgan swallowed. It wasn't enough. A faint smile tugged at Aisha's mouth. Not warmth, recognition. Come in. They sat at the kitchen table while a kettle hummed behind them. No small talk, just steam and silence. Then Aisha spoke. I was 28, she said. Postdoc at Stanford. Hired on a conditional contract at Virex, before it was even called that. Back when it was just a sketch in a lab, they brought me on because I caught something the other researchers missed. A flaw in the protein sequence. If they'd run trials with it, it could have killed people. Morgan's stomach turned. You tried to report it. I did. Internally. To the ethics board. Then to Centris when they backed us. I had documentation. Emails. Drafts. I thought I'd done everything right. Morgan didn't interrupt. Just listened. They erased me, Aisha said. One day I was lead researcher. The next, I was in violation of confidentiality protocols. They scrubbed my files, threatened me with legal action, said I'd never work again, that no one would believe me. And the money? Morgan asked. Aisha's mouth tightened. They offered a settlement, called it compassionate severance. 6 figures to go away. I was broke. My mom was sick. They knew. Of course they knew. Morgan leaned in. Why didn't you fight it? I did, she said. But fighting a billion-dollar firm when you're a single black woman with no job history and no legal team? That's not a fight. That's a funeral. Morgan nodded, slowly. You're not invisible anymore, she said. Aisha looked at her. For the first time, really looked. You're not either. They sat in the quiet for a moment. Then Aisha pushed a small flash drive across the table. I kept a copy, she said, even though I wasn't supposed to. I've been afraid for 10 years. But what you did, that made the fear feel small again. Morgan picked up the drive, her fingers shaking slightly. This has the original trial data. And the internal correspondence, Aisha said, including the email from Blakely. He ordered the results buried. Morgan closed her hand around the drive like it was glass. This wasn't just receipts. This was the match. Back in LA, Zara was ready. She'd been working non-stop, cross-referencing, verifying documents, contacting old Centra staffers under false pretenses. She hadn't published yet. Not until Morgan said go. When Morgan walked into the cafe near Sunset where Zara was camped out with headphones and a half-eaten muffin, she handed her the flash drive wordlessly. Zara plugged it in. Read for 20 minutes. Then looked up. This will destroy him. Morgan nodded. It'll destroy more than him, she said. It'll scorch Centris. It might even torch every board that's still covering for him. I'm not doing this for headlines, Zara. I'm doing it for the people who never got a seat at the table. Zara stared at her. You're ready to be the face of this. Morgan exhaled. No. Then she met her eyes. But I'm doing it anyway. Zara nodded once. I'll publish in 48 hours. Morgan stood. I'll give a statement. On record. Make sure Aisha's part is protected. She's already paid enough. Zara looked down at her laptop, then back up. After this, there's no going back. Morgan's voice was steady. I'm not going back. I'm going forward. She turned to leave, heart pounding like a war drum in her chest. 2 days. That's how long the world had left before the story broke. And this time, it wouldn't be buried. It would burn. By dawn on Monday, every major outlet had it. The buried files, Virex scandal exposed. Exclusive, Morgan Drake and Aisha Grant speak out against fraud, suppression, and the billion-dollar lie. They tried to erase us, hidden past of tech darling Virex now public. The story opened with Aisha's voice. Zara had gotten it exactly right. Her tone, her pace, her dignity. She didn't sound like a victim. She sounded like someone who'd waited a long time to be heard and finally had the MIC. I told them the data was unsafe. I told them people could be hurt. They called me aggressive, said I was misinterpreting the risks. Then they offered me silence wrapped in cash. Morgan's statement followed. Simple, direct, with her name attached. I worked quietly for years, believing I could change things from within. But systems that reward silence will never hold truth for long. This isn't just about Charles Blakely. It's about the culture that made him, enabled him, protected him, and punished the people who told the truth. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. The documents were enough. Blakely's signature on the falsified approval. Centris's internal memos urging suppression of the whistleblower. Email chains showing executives mocking Aisha's concerns. One even calling her overly sensitive and clearly political. Zara had posted everything with receipts. By noon, the calls had started. The SEC, the DOJ, 2 major centrist clients announcing immediate divestment, 3 more reviewing their relationship. The tower was crumbling. And Charles? Charles was nowhere to be seen. His assistant put out a statement, said he was unavailable for comment. He was holed up in a rented villa in Carmel, where his crisis advisor was charging $900 an hour to manage optics. But optics couldn't stop what was already rolling downhill. On Twitter, Morgan's name trended for 10 hours straight. So did #WeSeeYouNow, a hashtag someone started under Aisha's interview clip. And just beneath it, the real shift. Not the praise, not the shock, but the recognition. Women, especially black women, in science, in finance, in law, in hospitals, in classrooms, posting their own stories. I was told I was too emotional when I flagged falsified trial results. Guess who got the promotion? I said a senior partner touched me in a meeting. They said I misunderstood. I shook the CEO's hand. He wiped his palm on his pants after. I still remember the look. They weren't just talking about Charles. They were talking about every Charles they'd met. And Morgan sat on a bench near Echo Park, phone in her lap, staring out at the water. She hadn't spoken to press again. Let the story do the work. Her mom had called that morning, voice thick with emotion. I saw your name, baby. You told the truth. I knew you would. Morgan had just smiled into the phone. It's not over yet. And it wasn't, because late that night, the silence cracked again. A second email arrived in Zara's inbox. Anonymous. Subject line. You're not done yet. Attached was a single PDF. Redacted, but not enough. It showed that in the years after the Virex deal was covered up, Centris had funded 5 more biotech startups, each with flawed trials, each with whistleblowers who mysteriously vanished from records, each with at least one internal reference to precedent from the Virex situation. Morgan read it once, then again, then stood, her legs shaking slightly beneath her. This wasn't just a one-time cover-up. This was a template, a playbook, and Morgan Drake had just cracked it wide open. She picked up a phone and called Zara, who answered on the first ring. We have another story, Morgan said. Zara didn't hesitate. I'm listening. Morgan exhaled. This time, it's not about a handshake. A pause. Then, it's about every voice that got silenced after. The map was bigger than they thought. Zara spread it across the table. Lines, pins, sticky notes, timelines, each connected to another. What started as one company, one lie, had unraveled into a decade-long strategy, systemic, deliberate, and breathtaking in its boldness. Morgan sat across from her, staring at the data like it was breathing. And maybe it was. A living, pulsing web of fraud, suppression, and manipulation. Not just Virex, not just Centris. 7 biotech firms, 4 healthcare funds, over a dozen clinical trials with discrepancies buried in red tape. Zara pointed to one, Villanova Labs, Cambridge, 2016. Their chief of research disappeared off the org chart 6 weeks after questioning trial acceleration. No resignation notice, no replacement announcement. She just vanished. Morgan traced the name with her finger. Her stomach twisted. They used the same language in the internal memo, she said. Unnecessary friction. Just like they said about Aisha. Zara nodded. I cross-referenced the email headers. They were using the same consultant firm across all 7 companies. PR firm called Carter Wells and Page. Quiet, expensive, built for crisis control. Know what else they handled? Morgan looked up. Zara turned the screen. Centris Capital. It was all there. Like someone had drawn a blueprint of how to silence people and keep the money clean. Morgan stood abruptly. The air in the room felt thin. This isn't about one man anymore, she said. This is a machine. Zara was already nodding. And you exposed the fuse. But the machine was staring. Within 24 hours of the new leak, Centris filed an injunction, thinly veiled as a cease and desist against The Verge, Zara, and Morgan, claiming defamation, breach of confidentiality, and malicious interference with protected business relationships. Translation: sit down. Shut up, or we bury you in court. Morgan expected it. Zara didn't blink. They leaked the filing to the press. Headlines the next morning screamed. Centris tries to silence whistleblowers again, this time in court. Public sentiment, already molten, exploded. By noon, 3 more former employees came forward. 1 from Velanova, 1 from Rydell Therapeutics, and 1 from inside Carter Wells. Each of them said the same thing. We knew. We were told to bury it. We were told it was just optics. The playbook was no longer just visible. It was in flames. Back in Atlanta, Aisha watched the storm unfold from her kitchen. The silence of the last 10 years felt different now. Not shameful, not empty, but like a pause in a symphony right before the brass section crashes in. She hadn't returned to the lab since the settlement, but that morning, for the first time in years, she opened her old notebooks, flipped through them. The ink still dark, the ideas still brilliant. She wasn't erased, just waiting. A text buzzed on her phone. Morgan, it's happening. Everything. And they can't stop it. She stared at the message, then typed back. Tell them I'm ready to speak. On camera. When the exclusive interview aired, Morgan didn't watch it live. She sat alone in a quiet room, blinds drawn, phone off. She'd already done the hard part, giving the truth enough room to breathe. Aisha's voice carried across the country. I thought I'd never matter again. But this isn't just my story. It's every woman who got pushed out, erased, underpaid, or told she was imagining things. I want them to know. I see them. I hear them. And I'm not going away. The response was instant. Cable panels lit up. Hashtag sword. Hash they tried to bury us. Hash data don't lie. Hash DR Grant speaks. And through it all, one quiet name kept surfacing. Morgan Drake. She didn't post, didn't speak, didn't hold a press conference. But everyone was talking about her anyway. The woman who said nothing, then said everything. The woman who turned a handshake into a reckoning. Inside Silver Pine, the partners gathered for a midnight call. No one blinked now when Morgan spoke first. This isn't reactive anymore, she said, voice even. This is a campaign. A takedown of rut. One company at a time. Robert Tesla listened quietly, then nodded. You're not asking, he said. You're leading. I'm not doing this alone. You won't. Samuel leaned in. We can fund protections, legal support, data integrity teams, give every whistleblower a shield and a stage. Elena added, and if you want to build something on the ashes, we'll back that too. Morgan didn't respond right away. Then, we won't just burn it down. We'll replace it with something better. And for the first time, the table didn't flinch. They followed. That night, as Morgan walked outside, a breeze swept through the trees overhead. The city below shimmered with a quiet power. Her phone buzzed with a single message. Unknown number. You should have stayed silent. This isn't over. She stared at it for a moment, then deleted it, and kept walking. She wasn't afraid of threats. She was afraid of silence. And now, finally, the silence was broken. They started showing up in her inbox. Not the reporters. Not the threats. She was used to those. These were different. A message from a young engineer in Seattle. I worked on an AI drug modeling project for Velanova. We flagged inaccurate results. They told us to push it anyway. I still have the code logs. I'll send them, just tell me where. A woman from St. Louis. I was a junior at a diagnostics firm tied to Centris. I left after I found out they misled the FDA. I still have the original forms. I was scared. I'm not anymore. Over 100 messages in 48 hours. Some anonymous, some raw, some barely coherent, like the people writing them hadn't used their voices in years. Morgan read them all. Each one chipped away at the myth that these stories were rare. They weren't. The silence just made them feel rare. Now, it was a flood. And Morgan stood at the center, steady, collecting every drop. She wasn't just exposing a scandal anymore. She was pulling a whole world out from under its own rug. Zara had taken over a floor of co-working space in Culver City, now jokingly called the bunker. Dozens of volunteers, analysts, lawyers offering time for free, editors and fact-checkers trying to keep up with the volume. They were building something more than a series of articles now. It was a network. Zara called it the Clean Ledger Project. Morgan didn't care about the name. She cared about the work. And the momentum was terrifying the right people. On the third day, a former Carter Wells executive reached out through a private channel. Pseudonym, voice modulator, the whole deal. He wanted immunity, protection, a guarantee. Morgan offered him one thing, the truth on record. He took it. Zara met him in a borrowed office. The man looked hollow, pale, like he hadn't slept since the first article dropped. He opened a briefcase and slid over 3 flash drives. Everything, he said. The trainings, the contracts, the language we used. We didn't advise companies on how to cover up fraud. We taught them how to bury dissent so deep it looked like leadership. Zara just nodded. Your name won't be used, but your voice will. He exhaled like a man being let out of prison. Good, because I'm tired of whispering. But not everyone was whispering. Charles Blakely surfaced again, this time on a tightly controlled podcast run by a billionaire friend. Soft lighting, pre-cleared questions, and an image makeover that made Morgan want to throw her phone into traffic. He wore a gray sweater. No suit, no tie, a hint of gray at the temples. Contrite eyes. I made mistakes, he said, voice lowered. But I've been painted as a monster. I've built companies that changed the world. I'm being punished for one misunderstood moment. Morgan paused the interview. Misunderstood moment. She walked into the kitchen and stared at the floor for a long time. Aisha called her half an hour later. You saw it. Yay. Do we respond? Morgan considered that. Then, no. Aisha was quiet. You sure? If he wants to drown, let him. She picked up her phone and opened her notes. Typed. The last gasp of a broken man still trying to sound like a leader. Then deleted it. Not worth it. She'd already moved on. That night, Silver Pine's partners held another call, this one with regulators. Morgan was in the room. So was Aisha. So was Zara. It wasn't informal. It was intentional. We're offering documentation across 4 divisions, Morgan said. We've traced the suppression protocol through Carter Wells and 10 of their clients. Some of it crosses state lines. Some crosses federal regs. You'll have it all. A DOJ representative leaned in on the screen. Older woman. Sharp eyes. You're burning a lot of bridges. Morgan met her gaze. I'm not burning bridges. I'm showing you they were made of lies. No one spoke for a moment. Then the woman smiled faintly. I hope you've got fireproof boots. Morgan just nodded. I've been walking through fire my whole life. A week after the original expose, Morgan finally left L.A. Not to hide, to visit someone she hadn't seen in years. Her father's grave. The cemetery was quiet, overgrown in places. Her boots crunched over gravel and dry leaves. She knelt by the headstone, brushed a layer of dirt off the name. Isaiah Drake, 1958 to 2005. Say what you mean, and mean it loud. She rested her hand on the cold stone. I said it, Daddy, she whispered. I said it loud. Wind passed through the trees, brushing the words away into the sky. She sat there a long time, until the sun dropped low and golden through the branches. Not mourning, not anymore. Listening, letting it all settle. Letting herself remember that the work was only beginning. Because the house of cards had fallen. But the people still standing inside it? They hadn't noticed the roof was gone. Yet, Morgan wasn't trying to build a movement. She didn't wear the title. Didn't want it. She knew what happened to people who became symbols. They got flattened, frozen into a single version of themselves, their complexity ironed out until all that was left was a brand. But it didn't matter, because the movement had arrived anyway. On day 12, a group of biotech interns walked out mid-shift, holding signs that read, "Data matters. People matter more. Silence is not neutral. We believe Aisha." By day 15, 4 venture firms issued public pledges to implement third-party ethics review boards. Small change. PR move. Morgan didn't clap for it, but she noticed who didn't say anything. Centris. Still posturing. Still pretending it could weather the storm. And then, the real blow landed. The SEC announced a formal investigation. Fraud. Obstruction. Pattern and practice. They cited irregularities flagged in the clean ledger reports. Named Virex directly. Mentioned the suppressed trials. The forged timestamps. They didn't say Morgan's name. They didn't have to. The world already knew who'd pulled the first thread. But victory felt strange. Not hollow. Just distant. Like watching someone else win a game you forgot you were playing. Morgan sat in a rented cabin in Topanga, laptop closed, phone off, wind rustling outside. She hadn't spoken publicly in 5 days. The noise outside was getting louder, but she was done narrating the collapse. She needed to think about what came after. Because she hadn't just exposed something ugly. She'd revealed a vacuum. People kept asking what she would do next. Start a fund, launch an institute, write a book, but the truth was simpler. She wanted to make something that lasted, not just justice, infrastructure. So she called the only person who could help build that without trying to own it. Aisha. They met in a shaded garden behind a community science center in Oakland. Aisha was sketching something on a napkin, circuit lines, molecules, annotations that would have stumped half the Stanford faculty. "I've been thinking," she said, before Morgan even sat down. "All these black and brown girls who want to work in research, data science, biotech, where do they even go? Where do they get trained in truth-telling and science? Where do they learn that being ethical doesn't mean being excluded?" Morgan nodded slowly. "You want to build a lab." "I want to build their lab," Aisha said. "A space where integrity is baked in. Where nobody gets erased." Morgan leaned back, looking at the napkin, then at her. "We'll fund it. Quietly. But it'll be yours." Aisha smiled. "No, it'll be theirs. I'm just opening the door." Morgan felt something settle in her chest. That was it. That was the answer. Not revenge. Not even exposure. Redirection. Putting power in places where it would actually grow something worth keeping. By day 20, Morgan's face was on the cover of 3 major magazines. She didn't pose. They used archival images. One cover got her profile slightly wrong. Called her an overnight force. She laughed when she saw that. Overnight? Try a decade. Try showing up and being invisible so long, you started to believe it was your superpower. She wasn't mad. She was just done waiting for people to understand her on their timeline. Then came the hearing. It wasn't a trial, not yet, but it was public, televised. Charles Blakely was forced to appear before a congressional subcommittee on tech and healthcare fraud. He wore a Navy suit, no tie, under-eye bags deep enough to hide in. He tried to sound contrite. He didn't manage it. A young congresswoman from Illinois leaned forward and said, "Mr. Blakely, did you sign off on the Virex clinical trial knowing the risks to patients were misrepresented?" He blinked, shifted. "I signed what was presented to me by my team. I trusted them." "Did you know Dr. Aisha Grant had raised ethical objections?" He cleared his throat. "I don't recall direct communication with Dr. Grant. They played the email. Removed Dr. Grant from the team. She's a disruption." His signature. Silence followed. On the live stream, over 2 million people were watching. Morgan didn't cheer. She just watched. Not with satisfaction. With clarity. Because this wasn't justice. Not yet. This was accountability. And that was just the beginning. Later that night, a delivery arrived at Morgan's door. No note. Just a flat box. Inside, a simple wooden plaque. Carved into it. "Next time, shake the damn hand." Morgan laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. She didn't know who sent it. Didn't need to. She hung it in her hallway, across from a mirror. A reminder. Not of the moment Charles turned away, but of the moment she didn't. The lab opened 3 months later. No fanfare, no press release, no ribbon cutting. Just a room in South LA, tucked between a shuttered pharmacy and a corner cafe. A converted warehouse with glass walls, second-hand equipment, and a sign above the door that read, "The Aisha Grant Institute for Ethical Research." Aisha didn't want her name on it. Morgan insisted. This time, she'd said, "We named the women who built the damn thing." Inside, the place buzzed with quiet energy. Not the kind you see in billion-dollar campuses. This was scrappier, realer. 20 students, mostly black, brown, and brilliant, ran simulations, cross-checked data sets, peer-reviewed each other's work like their futures depended on it. Because they did. Morgan walked the space slowly on opening day. She kept her distance, letting Aisha lead. Aisha moved through the lab like it was a cathedral, touching every table, checking every code board like a ritual. This, Aisha said, eyes scanning the room, is what they tried to keep from happening. Morgan smiled. Too late now. Back in the outside world, the fallout hadn't stopped. Centris Capital lost 41% of its clients in the span of 8 weeks. 3 senior partners resigned. Carter Wells and Page went under entirely, shut down in the night, website scrubbed, office lights dark. Charles Blakely? Indicted. Why a fraud? Obstruction. Perjury. He pleaded not guilty. Tried to run the misunderstood genius defense again. It didn't land this time. Too many receipts. Too many voices. Too much Morgan. The trial was scheduled for spring. Morgan wouldn't be there. She didn't need the end of his story. She had too many of her own to write. At Silver Pine, the partners restructured their charter. The veto clause that once protected secrecy, gone. Replaced with a board of community advisors, scientists, ethicists, former whistleblowers. No suits, no donors, just people who knew what it was to speak truth when no one listened. Morgan didn't chair it. She declined. Instead, she offered to find the next Morgan Drake, the one working in silence, somewhere underpaid, underestimated, overqualified. Let me give her what no one gave me, she told Robert Tesla. Not a seat at the table. Her own table. Robert nodded. We'll fund it. You won't control it. We won't. He meant it. It was the first time she fully believed him. Weeks passed. The headlines faded. But something else started to take shape. Young analysts citing the Clean Ledger Project in job interviews. University students quoting Aisha Grant in thesis papers. Policy changes in 3 states. New whistleblower protections tied directly to Zara's reporting. It didn't feel like a revolution. It felt like erosion. Slow, relentless, permanent. And Morgan knew that's what real change looked like. Not fire, not fury, sediment, pressure, shift. On a rainy Thursday, Morgan visited her mother's clinic for the first time since the funding. Her mom was in the garden outside, pruning hydrangeas in a yellow poncho. Fancy lady shows up and still doesn't bring an umbrella, she teased. Morgan laughed. I brought something better, she said, holding out a warm bag of empanadas from the corner spot her mom loved. They sat on the bench under the awning, sharing food, watching rain beat across the sidewalk. Her mother looked over. You okay? Morgan nodded. Yay, for the first time in a long time. You did a hard thing. I did the right thing. Her mother smiled, a tired, proud smile only moms know how to wear. You always do. They didn't talk about Charles. They didn't need to. The story had already moved past him. That night, back at her apartment, Morgan stood in front of the mirror. Same reflection. Same scars. Same steady eyes. But something was different. Not softer. Clearer. The plaque on her wall caught the light as she passed. Next time, shake the damn hand. She didn't smile this time. She nodded, because she knew the next time had already started. Out there, somewhere, another boardroom was bracing. Another girl was watching. And when it came again, when the powerful forgot to look up, forgot to see, they wouldn't just lose a handshake. They'd lose the world they thought they owned. Morgan was sitting on the floor of her apartment when the email came in. No subject line. Just a single link. She almost deleted it. Then saw the sender. Clarence.j.wright@protonmail.com. Clarence, the janitor who gave her the first file. The man who started the slow fall of giants with a plastic folder and trembling hands. She hadn't heard from him in weeks. She clicked the link. It opened a secure folder. Inside, 2 recordings, a set of scanned documents, and a note. One last thing I didn't give you. I wasn't sure you needed it. Now I think you do. Morgan downloaded the files and listened. The first recording was grainy. Voices overlapping. Background noise. Then, a familiar one, Blakely's. You keep her quiet or I walk. I don't care what she found. Grant doesn't go public. Not now. Not ever. Another voice, unfamiliar. She's a liability, Charles. Then do what you need to do. Pay her. Threaten her. Just clean it up. Morgan paused the tape. Her breath caught. This wasn't just evidence of the fraud. This was proof of the intent. Not negligence. Not a bad call. Deliberate silencing. And it wasn't just Aisha. The documents Clarence attached showed a pattern that went back even further than anyone realized, almost 15 years. Suppressed reports, hidden audits, fabricated patient data from an oncology trial in 2009. This wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of a longer, uglier one. She didn't sleep that night. She sat on her couch with the blinds cracked open, watching the LA skyline blink in and out of fog. For years, Morgan had lived by one rule: move carefully, speak rarely, strike only when the numbers were on your side. But now she had more than numbers. She had names. She had a map. And she wasn't going to hold it alone. She forwarded the files to Zara with a note. We were wrong. This isn't 7 companies. It's 19. And we haven't hit bottom yet. Zara's reply came at 2:13 a.m. I'll fly out tomorrow. We build a team. Full-time. Investigators. Researchers. You ready to go deeper? Morgan stared at the blinking cursor. I was born in the deep end. She hit send. The next morning, she met Aisha for coffee. The cafe was quiet, almost reverent now, locals recognizing them but pretending not to stare. Morgan slid a copy of the audio across the table. Aisha listened. Still. Silent. When it ended, she looked up with eyes that didn't blink. 15 years, she whispered. I wasn't the first. I was just the first they paid off big. You were the first they couldn't break, Morgan said. That's why you scared them. Aisha reached for her cup, hands steady. We're gonna bring this all the way down, aren't we? Morgan didn't answer right away. Then she leaned in. We're going to make sure it never stands up again. Silver Pine pledged a new fund by the end of the week. $100 million dedicated to ethical science, whistleblower grants, and rebuilding what corrupt institutions tried to destroy. Morgan declined a formal leadership role. I don't want a desk, she told Robert Tesla. I want movement. So they created a new post just for her, shadow partner. Unlisted, unnamed, but with full reach. It was exactly how she liked it. The Clean Ledger Project expanded into a permanent investigative body. Zara now had 5 full-time journalists, 3 legal consultants, and a cybersecurity team to verify sources. Every week, more messages poured in. And now, they weren't just confessions. They were offers. Lab workers, engineers, compliance officers, even former executives, people who were done being quiet. One message came with no name, just a sentence. I thought I was crazy. Thank you for proving I wasn't. Morgan read that one twice, then printed it and folded it into her wallet. Not for ego, for focus, because all of this, every fallout, every takedown, started with a single truth. Someone saw the lie, and someone else believed them. One night, as summer broke over the city, Morgan stood alone on a rooftop in Boyle Heights. Below her, lights flickered like a heartbeat. She took out her phone, scrolled to an old voicemail. Her father's. It was short, a few seconds, from years before he died. Baby, remember? Don't ever let people tell you what your voice is worth. You know better. She listened to it twice, then again, and when she finally slid her phone into her pocket, she didn't cry. She just smiled. Because that voice, the one the world tried to keep small, it had never been louder, and she hadn't even raised it yet. The courthouse was surrounded by cameras. Not for Morgan. For him. Charles Blakely stepped out of a black SUV, flanked by lawyers in expensive suits. His face was pale, jaw clenched. For the first time in his career, no one was here to shake his hand. The trial was public, federal, 6 counts, fraud, perjury, conspiracy to obstruct, and 3 lesser charges. The prosecution had built its case like a cathedral, methodical, detailed, precise. They didn't need Morgan to testify. Her work was already in the record. Every receipt, every buried file, every erased name. But she was there anyway. Back row, black blazer, notebook closed on her lap. Watching. Not with hate. With purpose. Aisha sat beside her. She wore a navy blue dress and the same silver earrings she used to wear in the lab, her small way of reclaiming something. She didn't flinch when the attorneys said her name. Didn't blink when the defense tried to downplay her testimony as interpretation. The jury didn't buy it. No one did. Charles S. lawyers argued he'd been misled by his staff, that he'd delegated responsibility. The prosecutor played the recordings. Remove Dr. Grant. She's a disruption. Clean it up. I don't care how. Words spoken without hesitation, without remorse. The air in the courtroom felt like glass. By the end of week 2, the verdict came in. Guilty. All 6 counts. Morgan didn't react. Not outwardly, but inside, a door she'd been holding shut for over a decade creaked open. Not for vengeance. For closure. Not because he lost. Because the truth won. Outside the courthouse, a small group gathered. No chants. No signs. Just people. Watching. Someone called Morgan's name. She turned. A girl, maybe 19, stepped forward. Nervous. Holding a small notepad. I'm sorry. I wanted to say thank you. I'm a first year at UCLA. Bioinformatics. I almost dropped out last year. I thought maybe this wasn't a world for people like me. Morgan tilted her head. What changed? You did, the girl said. Morgan didn't have an answer for that. Not a polished one. So she did what she hadn't done that day, all those months ago in the boardroom. She reached out her hand. The girl shook it and smiled. Later that night, Morgan sat alone on her balcony. Feet up, a half glass of red wine untouched on the table beside her. The city breathed below. She thought about every person who tried to make her small. Every door that was closed. Every hand that went unshaken. Every room she was told she was lucky to be in, even though she'd built the floor under it. And she thought of the ones who whispered when no one else would listen. Clarence. Aisha. The quiet army of people who didn't want power, just truth. They were the real story. She was just the fuse. Her phone buzzed. Zara. New leak. Another one. This time it's Farmer. East Coast. You want in? Morgan smiled faintly. Always. She closed her eyes and let the breeze move through her. The story wasn't over. It would never be over. Because somewhere out there, another boardroom was dimming the lights. Another girl was being told she was too loud, too soft, too young, too much. And Morgan Drake? She'd be waiting. To see the lie. To speak the truth. And to pull the next $2 billion without blinking.